How do I begin to use standards-based grading? This video was created by Renee Martin, English teacher, Van Meter Community Schools. You may be wondering what makes me qualified to talk about standards-based grading. I have not been doing this for years, and in fact, this is my first year of teaching. But I decided that since it was my first year, I might as well jump in head first, and I've been using standards-based grading for all of my courses. When I began writing my standards, the biggest question that stood before me was how do I go from the Iowa Core to standards that I can use and my students will understand? It is our job to ensure students are being taught and assessed over the Iowa Core, so it made sense to me that my standards should start there. There are so many pieces to the Iowa Core curriculum that having standards based on these pieces would help me to ensure my students are learning what they need to be successful. At first, it was overwhelming to think about all of these small pieces and having to enter each one into a gradebook as a separate standard. Not only are they written in academic language that is hard for students to understand, there are just so many items that are part of the Iowa Core. I knew I had to find a way to translate these items into usable standards or objectives that I could use to guide my students and my instruction. The first step was deciding how to organize all of these pieces. A helpful start for me was looking at the college readiness standards. These are the larger ideas or processes that our students should be able to produce before they leave for college. These bigger ideas, such as understanding key ideas of a text, are much more accessible for students and parents than employ a full research-based comprehension strategies. The college readiness standards help me to group and organize every single item from the Iowa Core into 12 standards or learning objectives that I use in my English classroom. Now that we have written the standards that will be assessed, how do we use these standards to check for student learning? Our school uses ActiveGrade, a system that is meant to work with standards-based grading. Instead of putting assessments in for a grade and having a point total at the end of the semester, you put in your standards that you will be assessing throughout the year. I have 12 standards, and each standard will be formally assessed 2 to 4 times a semester. Once you have entered your standards, all of your assessments will fall under one or more of these standards that you are assessing. I have my grading set up so that the most recent grade for each standard is the one that shows. This way, if you assess students on their reading comprehension 3 times, the most recent score is the only one that shows up. This is to help the grading reflect what they know at that point in the year. Through our school's discussion about standards-based grading, it was decided that we would have a 4-point scale plus a 0. It was also decided that to better help parents, students, and teachers describe the student's level of understanding, we would implement a system that included letter grades instead of points or symbols. These grades are not figured on points or averages, but on levels of understanding. Standards help students to focus on what they need to show for their learning for that particular assessment. Instead of focusing on 6 or 7 points of a rubric, they could focus on the 1 to 3 standards that are being graded. One of the best ways to guide students when it comes to being assessed on a standard is to utilize rubrics. I have a rubric that is designed for each of my 12 standards, and then I adapt them for each assessment to be more detailed so students understand what is expected of them. Now that we understand how standards help in grading, where else can we use these ideas? Writing the standards and grading with the standards is just the beginning of standards-based grading. Don't let it stop with the gradebook. By grounding your teaching and your students' learning in these standards, you will have a clear path for each course. When the focus turns from the specific type of product a student must produce to allowing students to show that they learned a standard through their choice of product, you begin to see more motivation and creativity than ever before. Standards open up the classroom to new ideas about teaching and learning. For more information, contact renee.martin@vmbulldogs.com.